Good morning. This lecture video is going to focus on electrons and where they're found in atoms. So remember in the last video we talked about how atoms are made of protons and neutrons and they're found in the nucleus or the center of an atom, and then the electrons are found floating around the outside. Well, they're just not randomly floating around the outside of the nucleus. There's actually a pretty organized way in which the electrons float around that nucleus, and that's what we're going to discuss today. So if remember, this is what an atom is, and here's the nucleus, which would contain the protons and the neutrons. Remember, protons have the positive charge and neutrons have no charge. And then surrounding this, so here's the nucleus, is going to be all of the electrons. Okay, so these are the electrons, and remember, they have a negative charge. So there's a way that there are orbits. It kind of surrounds, kind of like an orbit around a planet that surrounds the nucleus in which these electrons sit in. But these orbits can only hold so many electrons, and we call these orbits shells. They're energy shells. So each energy shell can only hold a certain amount of electrons. This first shell can only hold 2 electrons. The second shell can hold 8 electrons. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, the third shell can hold 18 electrons. And then there are other shells outside of that as well, but for our purposes, we would never probably go past the third energy shell, or the third 18 electrons that it holds. So this is visually what this atom is going to look like. Now, here's how this works. Let's use nitrogen as an example. Okay, nitrogen has 7, atomic number of 7, so we know that it has 7 protons. Okay, and because of that, we also know, because things are neutrally charged for the most part, unless indicated, so if it's got 7 positives, we know that it has to have 7 electrons as well. All right, so if we draw our nucleus here, okay, we know inside this nucleus there are going to be 7 protons. We know 14 minus 7 that there would also be 7 neutrons. And then if we were to draw these orbits on the outside, here's orbit 1. Okay, we know that in the shell, the first shell here, there's 2 electrons. It can only hold 2. Okay, but we have 7, so we're going to have to go to the next shell, the second shell. And we know the second shell is going to have 5 then. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 7 electrons total, okay, 2 in the first shell, 5 in the second shell. Now remember, this shell, this second shell, can hold up to 8 electrons. So we could have gone up to 8 in that second shell if we would have needed to, but we only needed 7 total, so we only had to put 5 in that next layer. But if we would have had, let's say we had element with that would have filled up this second shell, so we would have filled it up with 8, and we still had some electrons left over, then we would have had to go up to the third shell and add electrons into there. But we did not have to for this particular case. If you have questions about how these are organized, don't be afraid to ask.